This is the M3 Pro MacBook Pro in Space Black, and I've spent a lot of time with it over the last few weeks, and it's a great computer. I've compared it and tested it side by side with my M2 Max MacBook Pro, and this might have convinced me to do something I've never done before. So let me tell you about why I chose the M3 Pro version for this MacBook Pro, how it compares to my less than a year old M2 Max, and which computer I may ultimately end up with. So starting off with why I chose to go with the M3 Pro this year instead of the Max, there were basically three main reasons. The first reason is I don't really need the power of the Max. This M2 Max MacBook Pro has the 12-core CPU with 8 performance cores and 30 GPU cores, while the M3 Pro over here has a 12-core CPU as well with 6 performance cores and an 18-core GPU. With the M1 and the M2 versions of this MacBook Pro, I leaned towards the Max versions over the Pro chips because I could export video just a little bit faster, even though none of my regular computing use for my day job or personal apps would ever take advantage of the Max. I could always just kind of justify it in my mind, and I wanted the latest and greatest. And in the last 10 months or so that I've had this M2 Max computer, it's never failed me, it's never let me down. It never stutters when I throw multiple streams of 4K footage at it, and of course, it handles Google Docs and websites and whatever apps I need for my regular job. 85% of what I do with a computer is what I would consider to be a light load or pretty average computing. And with the introduction of the M3 chips this year, Apple did a great job explaining just how good their new chips were with, ambiguous graphs. And even though the M3 Pro was not the standout chip of the show, I figured I could be okay with it over the Max versions I previously went with, even if it wasn't a whole lot faster. And the second reason I decided to get the M3 Pro was the price. I just paid about $3,500 for this machine earlier this year. If I'm going to look at replacing it, maybe I should be a slight bit more conservative with my spending. And although not a ton cheaper, the M3 Pro with the 12-core CPU, 36 gigabytes of memory, and 2 terabytes of SSD comes in at $3,200. Moving up to the 14-core M3 Max would be an additional $400 or $3,600 total. And as I already stated, I don't really think I need the extra power of the Max chip. Sounds like a win-win. And the third reason I decided to go with the Pro over the Max chip is the heat. This M2 Max MacBook Pro gets a bit warmer than I like with my everyday use. I use the laptop open in front of my display and I can feel the heat radiating from the keyboard. Not enough to be unsafe or uncomfortable, but it is noticeable. When I previously compared the M1 Pro to the M1 Max and the M2 Pro to the M2 Max, the Max machines were usually a couple degrees warmer than the Pro machines, which I did notice. So for this year, if I figured I didn't need the extra performance of the Max, going with something producing less heat sounds like another win. So those are the reasons that I bought the M3 Pro MacBook Pro over the M3 Max. Comparing these two devices really just comes down to performance and battery and a couple of small things. Of course, there is that new space black color on the Pro and Pro Max models this year. And yes, I wanted the space black because it does look awesome. But other than that, the footprint and the screen size and the ports and even the weight are the same. The displays are the same Liquid Retina XDR. They have ProMotion. They get up to 1600 nits of brightness for HDR content. But the new M3 Pros get up to 600 nits for regular standard definition content compared to 500 nits on the M2 version. But honestly, I couldn't really see a difference with both at 100%, and that is way too bright to use in this room anyway. If you're in a brighter room or working outside, that will probably come in handy. Now, I do want to talk about performance and battery life differences, but first, let me show you how you can keep your new MacBook powered up on the go. This is the 145 watt power bank from channel partner Ugrade that has a 25,000 milliamp hour battery that will keep your devices powered up on the go. This battery pack has adaptive charging capabilities like other Ugrade chargers, including Quick Charge 3, Power Delivery 3, and others. This means that you can fast charge multiple mobile devices at the same time, including up to 100 watts for a single device. This will charge a 13-inch MacBook Air from 0 to 100% in just 90 minutes. This is the perfect companion to take with you on a vacation or a work trip when you're going to be away from power for a while. You can use this button here on the side to see how much power is remaining before you leave for the day, and you can even fast charge the 145 watt power bank when you get home to be ready for the next day. So if you want to be powered on the go, you can pick up one of these 145 watt power banks today using the links and codes in the description below, and my thanks to Ugreen for sponsoring this video. For everyday performance, as expected, they felt the exact same. For web browsing or office apps or watching video, editing documents, sending messages, emails, notes, whatever, all the things you do on a regular basis, there was essentially no difference between these two devices. If you look at Geekbench 6 benchmarks, you can see that the single core performance of the M3 Pro is about 13% faster than the M2 Max, with a score of 3032 to 2677. With the multi-core performance, the results are even closer, with the M3 Pro getting a result of 15,257 compared to the M2 Max at 14,145, or about just an 8% difference. These scores are really close and kind of fit my expectations of these two machines performing similarly. But I did run into some issues with Final Cut Pro on this M3 Pro computer that I don't see on my M2 Max. And I'm not talking about the issues I have with the base model M3 being completely unable to export my videos at all. I still haven't seen a solution to that, and I have sent example projects to Apple to verify the issue when they reached out. The issue I'm having with the M3 Pro is some stuttering in the timeline and slower export. I don't feel like my projects are that advanced. They're usually a couple of 4K clips in multicam, some B-roll on top, and maybe a couple of titles. I shoot with Sony cameras with S-Log3, and I use a conversion LUT and just make some brightness adjustments. Now maybe this is a complex video project for computers to handle, I don't know. The issues that I'm seeing are just general slowness when hitting play or pause before the video starts to play, or when scrubbing through the timeline there's a bit of a stutter when moving around. This doesn't make it unusable, just noticeable, and it doesn't happen all the time. There are a couple of differences in these machines that might explain the difference. First, although both of these are 12-core machines, the M2 Max has 8 high-performance cores and 4 efficiency cores, whereas the M3 Pro over here has 6 performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. But when watching playback in the timeline, with both of these computers, there is very little CPU usage. When looking at the GPU use during playback, both of them are using basically all of their GPU power, and despite the other features for ray tracing and whatnot in the M3 Pro, it's just not being utilized for this, but the extra cores in the M2 Max are. Then when it came time to do a video export, the M2 Max with dual encoders was nearly twice as fast as the M3 Pro, with about 14 minutes compared to 8 minutes for H.264 and 6 minutes to 3 minutes with H.265. The extra GPU cores in the M2 Max also show off in Geekbench with a metal score of 124,046 compared to 78,377. So the overall performance on these two machines for everyday tasks was basically the same, except when it came to Final Cut Pro for me, which I did not expect. And it did bug me quite a bit, but it does make sense. And this left me wondering if I would be okay with anything less than the M2 Max. As far as battery life goes for my main laptop desktop that sits at my desk for 90% of its life, I'm not too concerned with battery, but I did see a big difference. Starting with 100% power on both of these machines, I ran all of the benchmarks and tests that I could think of. When the tests were finished, the M2 Max ended with just 11% of battery life, which is lower than I expected, and the M3 Pro ended with a staggering 44% and just blew my freaking mind. The M1 and the M2 versions of these MacBook Pros were pretty good, but this is pretty crazy. So if you're someone who prizes battery over performance, this is a pretty great ratio. And when it comes to heat, I was right, and the M3 Pro does actually run cooler than the M2 Max. In light usage, you can see that the keyboard on the M2 Max is about 88 degrees Fahrenheit or 31 Celsius, compared to 84 degrees or 29 degrees Celsius on the M3 Pro. Moving to a little bit heavier use, I was getting around 99 Fahrenheit, 37 Celsius on the M2 Max, and 90 degrees or 32 degrees on the M3 Pro. Then when really hitting it with Cinebench running, I was seeing 108 degrees Fahrenheit on the keyboard or 42 degrees Celsius on the M2 Max, and 101 degrees or 38 degrees on the M3 Pro. These temperatures are noticeably different when using them, but not dangerous or a problem. I just find myself noticing that the Max is running warm when I'm in the middle of typing out an email or a note or doing some research or editing a photo. And the small reprieve I get from the M3 Pro as far as heat's concerned is pretty nice. And you might be asking about the fans or fan noise, and I almost never hear the fans in my regular use for either one of these except for benchmarking. Maybe when I'm exporting a large video in Final Cut Pro, I might hear them for a moment, or definitely in Premiere Pro, but generally I don't ever hear them. So after 2 weeks of using and testing this M3 MacBook Pro, I need to decide if this is something I'm going to keep or if I need to go in another direction. I bought this M3 Pro MacBook Pro because, well, it's new, and I thought it was going to be basically the same performance as what I was using, and I hoped that it would run a little bit cooler. And this M3 MacBook Pro is new, and it does run a bit cooler than my Max machine, but it did leave me wanting a little bit more in my video editing performance, and that ended up bugging me more than I thought it would. So I have 3 options as I see it. I can keep the M3 MacBook Pro, or I can go exchange it for the M3 Max MacBook Pro to get some of that performance that I'm wanting back. Or I could do something I've never ever done that I can recall, which is keep the M2 Max and skip the newest version. And honestly, as nice as it sounds for me to upgrade to the M3 Max, I'm leaning towards going back to the M2 Max, which sounds really weird coming out of my mouth. The M3 Pro is an awesome machine and has a great ratio of performance to battery life with all the features you would want from a Pro MacBook. And despite my optimism of thinking I would be okay with the performance of the Pro model and saving a few bucks, the performance, small, tiny performance issue that I saw with this MacBook when editing videos kind of trumps all of that and makes me want to go back to the Max or get a new Max. But what about you guys? What do you think of the new M3 MacBook Pros? Let me know below if you're planning on getting one and what you're upgrading from. If you want to see the issues I had with the base model M3 MacBook Pro in Final Cut, check out this video right over here. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, hit subscribe if you want, and I'll see you next time.